Hey everyone, I'm Benjamin. Welcome to my book club. We just finished reading part 5 of Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson as part of our read-along, and I'd love if you could join me as we recap and discuss John Boone's grand tour across the surface of Mars. Alright, as we've come to expect by now, new part means new viewpoint character. This time we have John Boone, the first man ever on Mars. And we've heard a lot about John in the previous parts. He's been in an on-again, off-again relationship with Maya. He was one of Frank's oldest friends who now have this rivalry between each other. But let's jump right in. We open with a short scene. Two scientists are staring at a computer screen, showing a simulation of DNA helixes spinning about. One scientist turns to the other and explains that they've created a new gene therapy, which can repair the gene sequence of an organism, essentially halting cell division errors. This technology could mean an end to aging and age-related illnesses and age-related ailments. The two scientists turn to each other and agree that this new technology changes everything. Alright, we have another time jump from the end of part 4. Here, I believe it's about 10 years. A quick aside here, the time here confused me reading this part. I'm not sure if it's because sometimes it was talking in Earth years and sometimes it was talking in Martian years, but I swear near the start it mentioned that there'd been 20 years since they'd landed, but then later on it definitely says that it's 10 years and then 11 years. And there's quite a few bits here that confused me. There's a dust storm later on that definitely lasts a number of years, but sometimes it seems like the storm's been going on for a couple of years, but then it's a couple months. And I'm sure it's just me misreading and that I'm an idiot, but it really threw me for a loop. I'll complain more about this later, but let's just get back to recapping. John, as the first man on Mars and a figurehead of the first 100, is seen as this community folk hero, community leader among the people. And he spends most of his time these days traveling between different settlements on Mars, meeting people, asking questions, raising morale of the troops, basically. But while he's doing this, he's also trying to understand the people that are here. John has a mission to build the bones of a new community, a new social order on Mars. And he believes he needs to rip apart everything that came before and start fresh and build something new. And this traveling is helping him see different viewpoints in this. We start off with John deep down in a moe hole, which is a several kilometer deep, almost kilometer wide hole dug into the surface of Mars. Another quick aside, I don't think it actually goes into the purpose of these explicitly at any point in this chapter. I believe from inferring what they're talking about is that the idea is that because it's kind of warmer underground where the heat gets, insulated, that by digging down to it you're releasing that heat into the atmosphere and warming the planet up. I think that's what's going on here. While at the bottom of this deep shaft, John looks up and notices something coming towards them. It's a giant truck. It's been blown off the road that circles the hole, and him and his companion run out of the way just barely, which is very difficult in the Martian gravity, and narrowly avoid being crushed by this truck. Examining this truck, it appears that some sort of nitrate explosive blew it off of the road. This is the 6th example John can think of deliberate sabotage on terraforming projects. There's been several of these trucks destroyed, there's been several mining wells destroyed, there's been damage to one of their satellites, and it's gone beyond pure accident or single people working on their own, and John is now worried that there is a group concerted effort to sabotage the terraforming project. He brings these concerns to Sachs, who has now been named the scientific head of the terraforming project. He's one of the most powerful and important men on Mars at this point, but Sachs in his normal fashion doesn't seem to really use that power or even know that he has it and focuses on his actual work. And Sachs puts John in charge of investigating the sabotage. John thinks of himself as the first detective on Mars and sets out on a glider for his first of many different stops through this part to investigate the sabotage. John visits many different settlements and many different groups during this section. I'm not going to touch on all of them, I'm just going to kind of go over some of the really important ones. Some of the ones that I'm not going to touch on a lot are he visits a Swiss road building group that builds roads up and down the chasm walls. He visits a few different Japanese mining groups. He visits a Sufi Muslim group where he dances and kind of learns to appreciate what's going on. But the main sort of story beats are from the following stops he makes. First off, he stops and visits Anne. Anne has always been opposed to terraforming, almost violently, opposed at times. While talking with Anne, who is not excited to see John, Anne reveals that a scientific discovery has been robbed from humanity. A team performing deep core drilling has discovered some microorganisms in one of their samples, but because of the similarities to the life forms that have been released by Sachs and his terraforming team, the consensus is that they're probably Terran, and Anne is furious. She doesn't know if these life forms were Martian, but as she says, now we can never know. One of the most important questions in the scientific and cultural and societal worlds can never be answered now, thanks to the terraforming project. Anne says that despite her hatred of the terraforming project, she knows these sabotage effects are useless and are ridiculous and dangerous, and she says that she has no part in them and she wants no part in them. She suggests John talk to someone called the Coyote. The Coyote is this folk hero folk tale that is spreading among the settlements on Mars. Stories tell of a man walking around Mars without a suit on. Stories tell of a man walking around Mars helping travellers from lost colonies. And this man is known as the Coyote. Sachs says that he's heard of this man and he believes he was the stowaway aboard the Ares and that ℙ𝕚𝕚 was the one that helped him hide him on the Ares. John thinks back to Maya's claim that she saw someone on Ares who wasn't meant to be there. During his travels, John laments the lack of communication from ℙ𝕚𝕚. Ever since her and her group disappeared many, many years ago, no one has heard from them. And he wishes many times during this journey just to talk to ℙ𝕚𝕚, that she would be a very useful bouncing board, sounding board for this sort of stuff, and that she'd be very helpful in this investigation. John meets with a travelling Muslim caravan and sits and eats with the men and women inside. Frank is already here, and Frank's relationship with John has not improved. He's still very clearly angry with him. He's still very clearly jealous of him, and they don't work well together. And it's clear to John that Frank has turned the Arab community against him. John does himself no favours by, when Maya turns up, flaunting the relationship he's now rebuilding with Maya in front of Frank. This leads to a re-sparking of John and Maya's relationship, eventually leading to John suggesting that they get married. It seems that their relationship, while perhaps maybe not the most healthy, is probably the healthiest it's ever been. John then meets up with ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚, a UN official on the planet. ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚 is a German millionaire with ties to several of the large transnational corporations. These transnational corporations appear to be above countries as far as like law and commerce go. Think of the giant corporations and things like Cyberpunk and Neuromancer. They are groups that are so powerful of themselves that they eclipse many countries in the power and political capital that they wield. And ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚 has suspicious ties to several of these groups. ℙ𝕚𝕚 informs John that one of these transnationals' arms corps has been granted the right to mine in the Elysian Plateau. John argues that that's against the Martian treaty, that they can't mine there, it's against the treaty. And ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚 brushes him off, saying the treaty's up for renewal in a few years anyway. We all know which way it's going, there's no need to wait. John meets up with Maya again at Vlad and Ursula's biotech complex, where we find out that that scene from the start with the two scientists occurred with Ursula and Vlad and their group of biotechnicians. They have the gene therapy available. Ursula says that they don't know how far the longevity treatment will take them. It could be several extra years of your life, could be decades, it could be more. They're offering this treatment to all members of the first 100 to begin with, and for now, keeping it under wraps. John and Maya both undergo this treatment, and John feels happier and better than he has in years. While at the complex, a dust storm hits, the first in many years, and what is sure to be the longest on record. The dust storm encompasses the entire planet and leads to limited visibility of several meters, dust getting in everywhere, dangerous conditions, and the terraforming project taking a backslide as the planet cools down again because of the dust storms. Sachs' terraforming project itself takes a lot of flack for the dust storm, some claiming that it's their moholes and their wind turbines and whatnot that caused it. During his travels, John visits several mines, and it's interesting that he meets these miners who all are very clearly employees. These don't seem to be people that came here to mine for themselves, they're people that have been sent here to mine. He likens it to people being sent to Siberia or other hard conditions as a term of service for a company before they can move on to nicer and better conditioned work. And while talking to them, he realizes that all the stuff they're mining is kind of worthless right now. It would cost more to raise it up out of the Martian gravity well and ship it back to Earth than they'd be able to sell it for. But the miners point out that they're not selling it yet. They're waiting for the space elevator to be built, and then they'll make a fortune. John then visits Phyllis at the space elevator headquarters. Here, he finds not only Phyllis, but also ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚 and a lot of other transnational businessmen and executives being shown a presentation on the upcoming space elevator. A miniature model of how it's going to work, one side anchored to a large meteor that will circle the planet, and the cable will drag down to the planet's bottom, and then elevator cars will drag people, materials, and whatnot up and down out of the gravity well very cheaply. John openly confronts Phyllis and the other executives that are here, stating that a project of this size and scale and importance can't be privatized. This isn't something the transnationals should come here and build and invest in. This is something that should be owned by all the people of Mars, and all the people of Mars should have equal access. And he likens the transnationals as parasites coming here to just siphon off their cut of every bit of the space elevator's produce, and that, they'll control access to it, and that it should be a public asset. John then leaves the complex, realizing that perhaps he's made some really powerful enemies here, but soon he forgets about it, because as he's making his way to his next destination, his rover goes off course. This hasn't happened before, this is unusual. But he figures if he just keeps following this chasm, he will eventually find the transponder road again. And it's at night, while he's lost here, that there's a knock on his door. There's 5 men standing outside of his rover. John realizes that if they wanted to kill him, they could have, without knocking. So he opens the door, he opens the airlocks, lets them in, and it's the Coyote and 4 other men who he believes are from Hiroko's group. John tries to get information out of them, but they don't give him anything. In the end, they ask John to slow down or stop immigration to Mars. John argues he doesn't have that power. They argue that he's being naive. Of course he has that sort of power. If he comes out against immigration and does speeches and talks about it, then he can turn public sentiment towards it and he can really sway things. That John has more power than he realizes. John says he'll think about it and he'll do what he can, and then realizes that his brain is foggy and he's feeling tired, and realizes he's being drugged. One of the men, a young man, is holding out this blue sponge type of life form and squeezing it, releasing some sort of aerosol into the air. John stumbles to try and knock it out of his hand, but only succeeds in scratching the man's arm, and then passes out. He wakes up, realizes that they've all left, and his rover is back on course towards the transponder road. And while thinking about what to do, he realizes that he scratched the man, and that underneath his fingernails he has some blood and skin, which he sends to Phyllis's lab to get analysed, and he finds out that, congratulations, John Boone is a father. John arrives at one of the larger settlements and discovers a group of new arrivals. He's introduced to them. These are a UN-sent security/investigation team. They're here to investigate the sabotage. John thinks that this is probably fine, good news, but immediately something is off, as the men are very clearly investigating him, not the sabotagers so much. They're immediately combative with him, immediately suspicious of him. They want access to his artificial intelligence, they want access to his rooms and his files, and John denies all of these. While trying to calm down, John takes a walk outside. While walking outside, 2 men approach and tackle him to the ground and cut open his suit at the back. John manages to escape back to the airlock, only to find it locked. Then he manages to, just in time, as he's running out of air, as his back is freezing, cut open the plastic-lined hallway and get inside and through another closed barrier door. His back is severely frostbit. He has been without oxygen for a little bit, but he manages to stumble back to his room. John hides all evidence of this attack and feigns ignorance when the UN team comes and tells him that there's been some sort of incident and that one of the hallways has been breached. John talks to 𝕙𝕚, and they talk a lot about politics and society, but I think one of the key takeaways here is that 𝕙𝕚 reveals that people like Phyllis and Frank are earning massive amounts of money by consulting with these transnationals. John ends up calling ℙ𝕚𝕚 to discuss the UN security team to try and get them off his back, but it's very clear from the conversation that ℙ𝕚𝕚 is on the side of this UN security team, and so cannot be trusted. After his conversation with 𝕙𝕚 and the discussion of political revolution and the possibility, 𝕙𝕚's compatriots and companions in this revolution begin to reveal themselves to John as he travels around. They begin to show him the stockpiles of food and water and power. They begin to show him entire settlements built into rock and mesas and cave systems that are hidden from satellites, that are currently empty but are there waiting for the eventual revolution that they see coming. John disagrees that open revolution's the way forward. John thinks that ratifying and redoing the Mars Treaty and through diplomacy and politics can this be solved. And to this end he returns to Underhill to explore the first settlement they lived in. And while at Underhill, it's full of strangers, people he hasn't seen, people who haven't seen Mars before because the storm is still going on several years later. And these people are confusing to him, and many of the old rooms have been replaced by storage sheds. But it's while he's here, he's again walking around, he's exploring the big salt pyramids that still haven't been used, that he notices on his way back 2 of the UN security team leaving the building where his room is. Suspicious, he gets his AI to tap into the camera system and finds that whatever evidence there was of whatever they did in there has been deleted, and that lying in John Boone's bed is a dead body. Someone is trying to frame John Boone for murder. John uses the cleaning robots, he tele-operates them, and uses them to move the body into the cleaning robot's big hopper and then go hide the robot back in the cleaning room. And then he comes back inside and goes and lies down on the floor to sleep. Later on that day, someone finds the body in the cleaning robot, the UN investigators are called, and they do a very bad job of hiding their surprise that the body was found in the cleaning robot and not in John's room. News comes from Sachs now that one of his big projects for the terraforming project has come to light. They have managed to attach rockets to a large water asteroid which is nearby and are steering it towards Mars. The idea being it will come into Mars' atmosphere, break up and release tons and tons of water ice and help speed along the terraforming project. John sees this as a great moment to celebrate. He invites many people to ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚 to have kind of a celebration moment to watch this asteroid enter. Over 1,000 people turn up at this celebration, setting up giant temporary tents and structures, setting up artworks and festivals and music and dancing, and John realizes that this is the community he wanted to build. These are the people melding together is the societal and economic and political group that he wants on Mars. Latecomers to the festival arrive in these big red dirigible airships, and as people unboard from these airships, it's clear that this is Hiroko and her farm group, revealing themselves for the first time in nearly 2 decades. John gathers all the members of the first 100 that are here, over 60 of them, together to have a meeting, where he does his best Sherlock Holmes impression, wandering around the room, revealing what he knows. First off, the saboteurs, they're from Hiroko's group. Hiroko starts to deny this, but John stops her and says, they're from Hiroko's group, but Hiroko doesn't know. It's the younger members of Hiroko group. They're more radicalized than Hiroko and the other farm members. And he reveals that he knows this because a stash of dental equipment, the only dental equipment that was sent to the planet, had been taken, and the only people that could have taken it were Hiroko's group. And the people that he's been seeing around the sabotage events, including the people that entered his rover that night, have these sort of stone-like veneers on their teeth that could only have been done with these tools. John also privately confronts Hiroko, revealing that he knows that she's been creating children from the genetic samples of the first 100. He knows the man in his rover that night was his son, and his mother was Hiroko. Hiroko reveals that yes, the group has been doing this. They've been implanting embryos that were frozen from the female members of the first 100 with sperm from the male first 100 and growing them to completion and having them as children, raising them as their own. The children know who their biological parents are, but Hiroko has told no one else. Hiroko says that she sees these as gifts to the first 100, that no one should be angry that they didn't have to have a part of this, and they still don't if they want, but these children exist and that they are their legacy. John also reveals to the group that someone is trying to kill him, and that he believes it's the UN investigative team. He doesn't have concrete evidence, but he has enough circumstantial evidence that it's very clear. Through digging, it's come out that the UN investigative team has less ties to the UN as it does to Arms Corps, the transnational that is backing the big space elevator that John was talking about making into a public works instead of a private business. It appears that John's talk of Martian treaty renewals and talking out against things like the space elevator and the mining has made him some very dangerous enemies that are willing to do anything to get their way. The members of the first 100 all agree that they should be the spokespeople for Mars, and that together they will help work on ratifying a new Martian treaty, designing something that is for Mars instead of for Earth. They come together and call ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚, give them all the information they know about the UN security team, and tell him that unless he sends them off the planet, they'll reveal all they know to the press back on Earth. ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚 agrees to send at least the leaders of this security team off planet for now. As the party breaks up, Hiroko agrees to stay in contact with John. Members hug and celebrate and begin to return to their normal lives, and John and Maya set off together in a rover to go to their next stop, discussing the possible different choices they could make for a Martian treaty. So I'm really torn on part 5 of this book. On one hand, we did touch on a lot of those things that I really wanted to. I really wanted us to touch on the big corporations' interest in Mars. I really wanted us to touch on the political and economic and social reforms that may be possible. But on the other hand, it's these giant time jumps between parts. Every part seems to have this big time jump between them, and the new viewpoint characters, and especially in this part, I talked about it briefly before, but the time in this part, I think this part lasted like 10 years. It lasted a long time, right? Like, the storm itself lasted at least 2 years, maybe more. Like, when the storm starts, it references that the storm will be going on in 2 years, but then we go back in time again and the storm's going to be going on for a couple of months. And we just jumped around a bit in time in this section, and it really confused me. And the other thing that this big time jump, especially between part 4 and 5, really does is I feel like I've lost these characters. I feel like I've been distanced from these characters. We see ℚ𝕚𝕟𝕟 again in this one, but it's been 15 plus years since we saw her last time. I don't know what's going on with ℚ𝕚𝕟. And it just kind of felt weird, this sort of journey across Mars with John Boone, doing these little, few page sections in each area. And it was good to see the breadths of everything that was going on. But I feel like I lost a lot of those character moments and character touches that I was really enjoying before. But overall, I'm still enjoying it. There was a lot of really interesting talk about like economics here, talking about treating an economic system as calories in, calories out, rather than treating it as just a way to make money. And there's a lot there that I agree with. There's a lot of talk about how a lot of corporations, businesses, and jobs and positions are more parasitic than they are giving any real benefit. And all that sort of talk, especially talk with ℚ𝕚𝕚𝕚 up on Phobos, was really interesting. But not much was made of any of it, I felt like. The actual investigating of the sabotage and then the murder attempts on John, while I guess the main point of this part, kind of doesn't really happen here. John doesn't do any real investigating. John just tells his AI to do investigating, and then at the end he tells us what the results were. And it's not a very strong mystery or detective section. But yeah, what did you guys think? What do you guys think of part 5? What do you think's coming next? I don't know what to think is coming next anymore. I mean, we know that John is going to die. I assume that's going to come soon. I actually thought that's what the celebration was going to be till we got there. But presumably it's in this next part or the part after. But with this longevity treatment, that's super interesting. But again, I feel like the longevity treatment thing is a book of itself. Like, you could make a book this thick just about the impacts of that back on Earth, and I would devour that book. That would be so interesting. But now with the time jumps we're doing, I don't even know. It could be 30 years later when I turn the next page, and half the characters could be dead, half of them could have children, half of them could be married, and I just wouldn't know at this point. Maybe it's just because this was a long part. Maybe it's just because this is probably my least favourite part of the book so far, but I'm feeling a little bit downhearted right now. But I'm looking forward to read the next bit. So I will see everyone in 2 weeks with part 6 of Red Mars, which will be our penultimate episode, as there are only 2 parts left. If anyone's still reading along with me, if anyone's still watching this, then thank you so much. And just remember to keep reading.